Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Kara Montalvas. I'm a licensed psychologist based in New York, and this is my YouTube channel, In Session with Dr. Kara. I'm really excited that you're here. This is going to be the first of many videos that I plan to release, hopefully once a week. And today I want to talk about something that I imagine many people who decide to follow this channel or who end up searching psychology on YouTube might be interested in, and that is how I became a psychologist. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that journey, about what made me want to go and pursue psychology, and the kind of work that I do now. Okay, so before we dive into my story, first, one of the things that I want to talk about is what exactly is a counseling psychologist. One of the things that I love about psychology is how broad it is. So for example, if you type in APA divisions on Google and you open up that webpage and it lists all the different divisions, every single one of those divisions are a different a different subfield within psychology. There's forensic psychology, child psychology, industrial organizational psychology, clinical, counseling, right? There's so many different ones. And so like I just mentioned, what you can do is just type in APA divisions, which is the American Psychological Association. There's also the American Psychiatric Association, which is different. You click on this one right here. You click join a division. And as you can see, there are lots of different ways to get involved and become a member in multiple different divisions or societies. So for instance, I'm very involved in the Society for Counseling Psychology, which is Division 17. I'm also very involved in the National Latinx Psychological Association, which is not a division, but it is a part of the psychological associations. And so there really is something here for everyone, depending on what you're interested in. And so I'm actually just going to read off, and I'll also post it on the screen. But a counseling psychologist is a generalist health service specialty in professional psychology that uses a broad range of culturally informed and culturally sensitive practices to help people improve their well-being, prevent and alleviate distress and maladjustment, resolve crises, and increase their ability to function better in their lives. So that's the definition for counseling psychology, and it encompasses a lot of different kinds of work, right? So if you look at our journal, for instance, the Journal of Counseling Psychology, you'll find that there are tons of different topics. One of the things that I do want to give our field credit for is how much we have been able to move the needle on what culturally affirming psychotherapy is, the consequences of not having representation in research studies, the consequences of not having a historically disenfranchised person in mind when we think about therapy, when we think about therapy outcomes. So one of the things that counseling psychology really emphasized is the need to pay attention to the lived experiences of marginalized communities. And so for that reason, I find that in counseling psychology, there tends to be more emphasis on historically disenfranchised groups, whether that's communities of color, LGBTQ communities, gender expression, gender diversity, right? So all the different ways that people can identify beyond the heteronormative white standard. And again, I want to emphasize that I know many clinical psychologists who can speak about multicultural counseling and culturally affirming therapy very well, and it's certainly a part of their professional identity. But and of course, I am biased. I do think that counseling psychology has really done a significant amount of work in the field to really elevate multicultural counseling to what it is today. And so for that reason, I find that even counseling psychology programs, so PhD programs, tend to be more diverse. One of the things that I really loved about my program was how diverse it was. So whether you decide to get a clinical PhD or a counseling PhD, just make sure you do your research, really try to understand what your interests are, what your research interests are, because if you compare some of the research interests of clinical versus counseling programs, you'll probably find that there is a difference in the kinds of work that different fields are doing. So now I want to talk about the steps in getting a PhD. This section looks different because I can't find the section that I recorded it on my other camera, but I wanted to just quickly jump in and say that I did my BA at the University of Maryland. I am always a loyal Terp. Something I always say is that I've been to many different schools through all the different degrees, and I am always a loyal Terp at heart. And I really used those 4 years to figure out honestly, being a psychologist was not even on my radar. I'm a first generation college student. I didn't really know what a PhD was. And so I was sort of just kind of bopping around campus, trying to figure out, where I had to go on what day. I was, kind of very much taking it day by day. I didn't have a 5-year plan or anything like that. And it was, I think, in my junior year where I realized that I really couldn't get a job with just a BA and that I needed to find other ways of pursuing psychology. And so that led me to my master's, which I'll get into in a little bit. But I also took time in undergrad to join research labs. And that was really, really important because of the emphasis that will have on your PhD applications. I had to re-record this, which is why it looks different, so bear with me as I learn my setup. But I wanted to now talk about my master's. So a master's is not necessary for a PhD in counseling psych. However, I had a very positive experience as I was pursuing my master's. I went to Boston College. But what I tell students all the time is that if you can get into a PhD program without paying for a master's, absolutely do it. All of my debt that I have, and I have a decent amount, is from my undergrad and my master's. I don't owe anything from my PhD, and that's because I was funded to go to my PhD program. And all of my debt is from those first 6 years of my education. I don't regret it though. I loved my experience at BC, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But what I do say is that if you are able to work in research, for instance, after your undergrad graduation, and you end up learning more about what it's like to be a part of a research team, to write a manuscript, to come up with research ideas, all of that is really great experience that you don't need a master's for, right? There are lots of places that would hire research coordinators or research assistants after an undergrad. Of course, right, if you apply to those jobs with a master's, that's also a really great way to get more competitive for PhDs. I know that's what I did. That's what a lot of people I know do. But you certainly don't have to, right? If you can get that kind of job right after undergrad, it's even better. Okay, so like I said, I went to Boston College in the Lynch School of Education, where I did my master's in mental health counseling. At the time, at least my first year of the master's, I wasn't sure if I wanted a PhD. It was actually in my second year where I started to kind of get a little bit more open to the idea. And that is when I got awful imposter syndrome, where I basically told myself that I wasn't ready, I couldn't do it, I wasn't cut out for a PhD. And so I decided not to apply, which I don't even think I was ready right after my master's. I think applying during my master's would have been very stressful, and I wouldn't have probably gotten in anywhere just because I still needed more experience. But I took a year between my master's and the starting my PhD in 2018 to work. So I worked as a research assistant at Brigham and Women's, and I worked actually in the nursing department, so it wasn't psychology, right? So your research doesn't even have to be in psychology. If it does, amazing. But I had worked in the nursing department of the hospital where they were doing trauma-informed care research, and they were working with medical providers and other staff in the hospital to get training on being trauma-informed so that when survivors come to the hospital, we are not then re-traumatizing them because of inappropriate medical procedures, right, and standards of care. And so that was something that was very formative for my own training, for my own development as a psychologist, and it was something that I had in between my master's and my PhD so that I could be more competitive for PhD programs. All right, and so then I applied for PhD programs in 2017. I got in 2018, or I started in 2018. And I went to Teachers College, which is also now where I teach, right? So I went to school there and now I work there. And for me, a PhD was about opening as many doors as possible because I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew that I loved clinical work. I still love clinical work, and I love being a therapist, but I knew that it wasn't something that I could do full-time, 40 hours a week, just because of how draining it is. And I think this is something that I really teach students in the program, is that this work is so rewarding and it's so beautiful, and I love being a therapist, and I love being able to support a person and help them recognize their value and their worth. But it's also very hard, right? This work is so hard, and it requires a lot of us. Okay, so now I want to talk about my PhD. So I started my PhD in 2018, so I took a year between my master's and my PhD.
where I worked at Brigham. And then I started my PhD with Dr. Brandon Velez at Teachers College. And one thing that's important to keep in mind with PhDs and when you're applying for PhDs is that you are applying to the school, right? So I applied to Teachers College, Columbia University. But more specifically, I was applying to work with a faculty member, right? I was applying to work with Dr. Velez. And that's very important for you to keep in mind when you're applying for PhD programs, because you're not just trying to go to the school with the best name or the best reputation, right? Obviously, those things may make a difference, right, in terms of where you end up. But I think that ultimately what is most important in your search is a good advisor-advisee match, because your advisor is the person who is both your academic advisor and your research advisor. And that is a person that plays a large role in your development as a scholar. I think that there are lots of other people that are involved in your development as a clinician, right? Because you're working at multiple different sites. But the research advisor plays such a huge role because they oversee your dissertation and any research that you do prior to the dissertation. And so it is so important that you go somewhere where you feel like you and the advisor are a good match. And something that I remember being told when I was at the Teachers College interview, so back in 2017, and it really kind of helped me feel a lot more calm when I was there. They had told the room of interviewees, right, so the people that had applied who had gotten an interview, they had told us that if we were in the room, that we were qualified and ready for PhDs, right? It's not about whether or not we could actually make it through a PhD. Now the question was fit. And the whole point of the interview day was to assess fit. And that was very reassuring for me, right? To know that ultimately I had what it takes to succeed in a PhD program. I just now needed to find someone, an advisor, who was a good match. And for me, that was Dr. Velez. So I loved the PhD for a lot of different reasons, but I would say one of the big ones was how many different training opportunities I was able to work in. So I worked in community mental health, I worked in hospitals, I worked in VAs, I worked in prisons, I worked in college counseling centers, I worked in private practice, all prior to me graduating with the degree. And so if you are someone that is really excited about all the different kinds of ways that psychologists train and all the different kinds of work that we could be doing, then I would say that a PhD could be a really good possibility for you in terms of what you might pursue because of how many varied types of training sites that you get. Certainly there are some people, right, who know they want to do college counseling, and so they stick with college counseling throughout the entire PhD process. I was someone who I wanted to figure out what I was most passionate about. And so, so that was my experience. I would say funding is another very big element to keep in mind. I only applied to PhD programs that were fully funded, or at least had, like good chance of being well funded, because I already knew how much debt I was in, like I said earlier, and I didn't want to pay for more school. So the PhD for me was overall a really positive experience. Was it hard? Absolutely. Did I have a couple breakdowns? Absolutely. But would I change it? No, right? I think that I am someone who is a changed person because of this degree, right? I walked into that program a very different Kiara than I am now. And I think that is because of the training and because of the friendships and the colleagues and the professional relationships that I've built and the confidence that I've gotten. I think the thing I'll end with is, I think that for me, one of the reasons why I really loved my training and the personal development that I got out of my training was that as a woman, as Latina, as a first generation college student, right, as someone who like all the things, right, that kind of make me feel as if I'm smaller than, right, or less important than. One of the things that I really loved about my PhD journey is I went into the space feeling really insecure, feeling really insecure about what I was going to be able to contribute to the world or who I was or what I was about. I didn't really believe in myself very much, right? And one of my favorite things that a friend told me, it was actually during the master's, and it was during my really bad imposter syndrome with the whole PhD situation. And my friend told me, Kiara, if you believed in yourself as much as everyone else believes in you, you'd be unstoppable. And it sort of has been my reminder during all these years of people believe in me. Now I need to believe in me. And so, and I do believe in me. I very much believe in myself. Do I get self-doubt? Absolutely. Do I get scared shitless? Absolutely. And I still have imposter syndrome, all those things, but I am so much more of a confident, assertive woman, psychologist, student, because of the training and the colleagues and the friends that I met. And so, but that's not guaranteed. You may go through a PhD and become a worse person. So, that is a possibility, but hopefully that's not the case for you. So, well, it was really nice to talk to all of you. If you have any questions about anything PhD related or psychology related, I'm happy to answer any questions on here. Just drop something in the comments, and I will see you all later.